Good evening. We are ready to begin our program, and we will begin with a prayer. Living God, we are so slow to recognize your presence, even when you stand among us, even in your living word. Still stay with us, we pray. Make yourself known to us, and let our hearts burn within us to share the good news that our Lord is risen indeed. Thank you for all the blessings you have bestowed upon us. We are truly grateful for them. Thank you for gathering us together this evening to meet and share our knowledge and time with one another. May the speakers be blessed as they continue to bring their expertise to our society and to our world. Bless each of us gathered as well, so that we will be able to glean information from this event. May we realize that all we do should glorify your name. Amen. I welcome each and every one of you who could join us this evening for this annual educational event sponsored by the Socially Responsible Investment Coalition. Many of you were here last year as we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the coalition. In recognition of this important milestone, we honored the founding congregations whose names are listed on the back of the event program that are at your table. At last year's celebration, the Executive Committee discussed various ways that our legacy can continue into the future. The idea of an annual recognition of a person and our institute who has contributed to the mission of SRIC was formulated. Thus, at this event, we will award the first ever Citizen Advocate Excellence Award to Sister Elizabeth Riebschlaeger, CCVI, and to the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word of San Antonio. At this time, I wish to express our appreciation to the sponsors who made this event possible: the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word San Antonio, the Congregation of Divine Providence, Dominican Sisters of Houston, Oblate International Pastoral Investment Trust, Sisters of the Holy Spirit and Mary Immaculate, Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word of Houston, Benedictine Sisters, Brigidine Sisters, and Esther Ng. We especially want to remember this evening Ted Wisniewski, an individual member who passed away on January 3rd of this year. Ted, along with his wife, Rita, were longtime members of SRIC. They supported the mission by attending many of these educational events. At this time, I wish to recognize their daughter, Mary, who is in attendance with us this evening. Mary. And I now wish to introduce SRIC's Executive Director, Anna Falkenberg, who will provide us with a report of the work that has been accomplished during this past year.
Well, good evening and welcome all of you. It's so great to have a crowd that's bright and shining, almost as beautiful as our decorations are. So, and it's always, excuse me, it's always good to be together for this special evening. And I'll give you a brief report of our work. Last year, as Sister Patricia said, the Socially Responsible Investment Coalition celebrated 40 years of building a more just and sustainable world by seeking justice and peace through actions which help transform corporate policies and behavior. That's a big job. And I don't have to tell you that we've been working on it for 40 years, and we've got some things we still need to do. For our event last year, our program title was SRIC at 40, Still Looking for the Promised Land. Although we haven't arrived yet, we are still on the journey. So just a short review of some things that we've done this year, of course, with your help and your support. We work for and through you, our members. One of our biggest projects is sending shareholder resolution filing packets to our members for co-filing with other investors. This is a great way for our members to use their stock ownership to speak truth to power and to advocate for important changes in corporate behavior. This season, we generated a total of 45 filing packets for 27 different companies. I should say Amazon got about 12. Including Amazon, ExxonMobil, McDonald's, Pfizer, and Walmart, some names you may know. And of course, there are many others. And some of the requests to the companies we were asking for reports on executive compensation, racial equity audits, paid sick leave policy and other worker benefits, environmental justice reports, Paris-aligned climate lobbying, human rights due diligence, tax transparency, and climate transition plans. We ask for a lot, don't we? And it's a long process to get companies to first of all engage with us. Often that process begins with a resolution, sometimes it begins with a dialogue. Then once the resolution is in place, some companies wake up and say, oh, we don't want that on our proxy ballot, let's talk. And so we meet with companies all the time and talk about the issues that we're bringing as investors to them. And of course, we do a lot of co-filing. We empower our members to co-file, but that isn't the only tactic we use. As I just mentioned, I spend many hours in corporate dialogues on the phone, by Zoom usually, and related webinars on your behalf. I've done 53 so far this year. The year isn't over. And I want to give the example of the most recent one I was on was a corporate dialogue with Smith & Wesson. You know them, they're gun manufacturers. And the ask was for a human rights policy. And the person who led that engagement is right here, Lydia Kuykendall. Lydia's with Mercy Investment Services, and what shall I say? They listened? That's fair to say. Another tactic is global multi-signatory letters. And you see many of these in our updates. They come to you to sign on to this or to that if possible. And that's also a tactic. We have global partners now. Our work is all over the world. And companies listen to us because our combined assets might be trillions of dollars. And when we all get together and sign our names to a letter, you would be surprised that we often get responses. All this work, of course, we don't do it alone. It's coordinated through our membership in the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility. You've heard about them, ICCR. And this year, it's not fair to call them our parent organization because we were going along in the way that they were, but that's our national group of CRIs like we are, and individual members and asset holders and asset managers, and lots of people that want to work alongside of us to advocate for shareholder advocacy. The ICCR is celebrating 51 years of national advocacy, and you know the story, I don't have to tell you, which began back with apartheid and General Motors. That's our beginnings as shareholder advocates. I currently serve on the board of directors for ICCR, and of course we have member conferences that educate all of us. And at the last member conference, Sister Susan Mika and I attended, along with Lydia and other people that are affiliated with ICCR, just a taste of what the sessions were and what we need to learn about and keep ahead of. Advancing worker justice and safety. Should I say more? We have been working on human rights for a long time here at SRIC and nationally, and now we're really focused on domestic workers, advocating for their rights and their safety. A just transition to renewable energy. It's happening, but there are all kinds of issues about, is it a just transition? Do the people in the communities, how are they affected, etc. Human rights implementation, human rights due diligence, that's a big part of our work. We do ask for human rights resolutions and reports from many, many companies. Racial equity is a very high priority now, and we're asking for audits. We ourselves as an organization are looking at auditing our own organizations to assure racial equity. Equitable supply chains. This is big work. Can you see what that might mean if we talk about the supply chains for Amazon or any company that has products, and what's going on down the line with those workers, and many other critical issues. But as always, our main focus is to educate our members about what is happening, not only in the world around us, the corporate world, but also in our area. This year, we really were, I think it's fair to say, I was a little bit shocked to see the development that was happening in Corpus Christi in the Bay Area. I knew there were some refineries down there, but once we got in touch with Sister Elizabeth and some other people who pointed out there is just so much development that is, our pristine coast, I think I can fairly say, is no more. I mean, there are water issues, there are all sorts of environmental justice issues, there's pollution, there's degradation. And so that area, the Port of Corpus Christi development is what it's called, is an industrial area that we really are focusing on. LNG terminals, refineries, plastics manufacture, desalination plants just bloomed I think fairly suddenly within the last 5 or 10 years. We would have to work through a company. So we might have our eyes on a company like Cheniere, which has some of the big LNG terminals there. But that work is just beginning. We're just beginning to look at it. So, and there are a lot of things going on in our state. As you may know, up at the Capitol, we discouraged the state of Texas boycott of several large institutional investors and 348 ESG funds. Now, some of you may not know what ESG funds are, but that's just one of some of you hold them. That's one attempt to make the investments resonate with environmental, social, and governance issues. State of Texas, there's a big movement now, the anti-ESG movement. And of course, many of our investors are involved in ESG funds, seeing them as a just way to assure that their investments are being used in the way they want them to. So that's a lot, I know, and that's just a small part of it. And we are all on this journey through the promised land, and it goes forward only for us because of your interest and your faithful support for 40 years and on into the future. So I have to say thank you all for making this work possible and making it happen. 40 years of work. Thank you. Thank you all. I could tell you more, but I'm going to stop here. And encourage you to go to our website and have there are other resources to see what we're up to. But be assured that we are up to speaking truth to power with the voices that we do have. Okay, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Esther Eng and ask her to come forward to present this wonderful award to Sister Elizabeth. Esther is an individual member of SRIC. She serves as the executive board treasurer. And I want to tell you, she is my right and left hand to keep this organization afloat and in line. And we appreciate her good work, keeping us on track, and her generous time. I think her husband Bob can speak to this, to serve the needs of her family and many friends. So Esther.
Thank you, Anna. Well, I see so many familiar faces here, especially all the sisters from CCVI. And it seems I'm get back to work, you know. But really, truly love to see the familiar faces here in this event. We just love you all can join us tonight. Now we are pleased to present the 2023 SRIC Citizen Advocate Excellent Award to our Sister Elizabeth right here of the Sister Charity Encounter Work San Antonio. Everybody know my name is Esther Eng, and I have a pleasure of working with Sister Elizabeth over 23 years of career with the CCVI General Finance Office. Before I share with some of Sister Elizabeth's background and why she's so richly deserving this recognition, I want to reflect who is Sister Elizabeth personally. First of all, she is a very busy sister, driving on the road with her phone on. And many times, she was even on Zoom meetings while she was on the road. But one thing is she loved to chat with everyone with her stories. She is also passionate about the world's issues and people's needs, especially financial. I remember I helped her to write monthly checks from her family account to help a family for several years. So I was really, really, kind of like really happy and also really proud of you. So you can see why Sister Elizabeth remind me of that Oscar-winning movie this year, because she is doing everything, everywhere, all at once. See?
I guess I'm gonna have to see the movie.
Yeah, you have to see the movie. It's really funny. Sister Elizabeth has a degree in musical education and a master's degree in religious studies from the Pastoral Institute at the University of the Incarnate Word. Her ministerial history includes service as a teacher in pastoral school, parish ministry, flood recovery, disaster relief, and also prison visitation ministries. Her greatest passion for her current ministry is protection of the environment and community affected by ongoing hydrocarbon fracking exploration and development in the Eagle Ford shale field across South Texas. Sister Elizabeth worked tirelessly to educate citizens and politicians on fracking's permanent threat to clean air, water, and land. She served as an advocate on behalf of the stakeholders impacted by the Eagle Ford shale activity and has testified before Texas Legislative Committee and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency hearing on behalf of more protective legislation and also regulations. And she continued to provide counsel on the individual level to citizens and their families as their life, health, and properties are being impacted by shale development, and serves as a contact for journalists and documentaries who help her spread the word, just like today. You will do that, is that right? That's right, good. And raise awarenesses about this critical threat to good stewardship of God's creation. So please join our SRC board to recognize him and honor her, this outstanding ministry of Sister Elizabeth.
Thank you very much.
Okay, before that, I gotta give you this first. See, is it beautiful? Yeah. So I'll let you go, you can talk. Thank you.
There you go, Mario. I'm so happy to be here tonight. And I want to thank you, Esther, and thank the SRIC board for this decision. When Anna called me, I thought, what? And I thought, this is just ordinary stuff, you know? But what's important is that it represents a recognition of being a voice for justice, a voice for the environment, for maybe I'm like a Paulette Revere, you know, for the environment, except I don't have a horse, I use a car. But I want to say that it is such an honor to be among leaders, prophets, for the truth, for speaking the truth with love in a corporate world, which today has become so aggressive, so merciless. I won't go into other adjectives because I might get carried away, but it's a very vicious environment. And little people, the people on the ground who are most impacted, have no voice. They get run over by the corporate steamrollers. So it's so important what the SRIC and others like us are doing in this world. I like to think of SRIC as being the conscience of the nation, as being the conscience
of the corporate world. And so I remember the beautiful song, "Be Not Afraid." We face a lot of power. When I first started doing what I do, making people aware of the damages being done to our environment by what was considered a boom and bringing millions of dollars to community, and what's the matter with you? This is wonderful stuff. There are some good sides to it. Little towns, rural communities were dying, and they were desperate. So they took what came to them as a miracle, and they are paying a price. Yes, they got a lot of benefits, but yes, they have paid a great price. One of the high officials of the Ecological Shale Consortium, who I got to know pretty well by going to those meetings, said to me last year, as the boom has now tapered off into regular production and it's expanded now to the coast of Texas, and Anna described what is happening there very well. Oh, I would urge you to go to a website called CAPE, CAPEnet.org. Errol Summerlin is a retired legal aid attorney who is, we always tease him and say, we didn't know it was possible to herd cats, Errol, but you're doing a great job. Because there are a lot of smaller organizations made up of retired people who work in industry who really know and understand and appreciate what's going on. And so they have come together to form several organizations that are working as an alliance to promote safety and respect for the environment. But people like him and like this person from the Eagleford Shale Consortium know, as the Eagleford Shale Consortium representative said to me, yes, it's wonderful. New millionaires, billionaires have been created all around us. Communities are getting a lot of money, but the people who live inside, and he was from a little town in South Texas, the people who live in the small rural communities are just as poor now as they were before this hit. And if you work in the rural areas, you know that's true. Think of it. The fracking is going on outside the towns. So there's so much to be done, but you bring so much hope to this world and to the corporate aggression. And I would like to think of us as the burr under the saddle of the corporate power as they ride their horses into these communities. And it doesn't make them comfortable. Well, I'm sorry, but being uncomfortable is nothing compared to being miserable and sick and at a loss for power. So, and I want to thank my congregation, so many representatives here tonight, but especially those in leadership who over the years have supported me. I know I always end up doing something unique and different, but they've always stood back and said, do what you have to do. And I'm so grateful for that. They didn't put any constraints on me. They always supported me. And really, it is the work of the congregation. It's not just one person. So I appreciate very much to my sisters and my own sister here and my niece here for being here tonight. And especially my friends Mario Bravo and Virginia Palacios. You'll be hearing from them, and they're great human beings and doing great work, and they're a younger generation, which is really great. So thank you all. Let's give yourselves a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Elizabeth, for your kind words, and continue to be passionate about everything that your whole ministry has been about. Next up is Father Seamus Finn, who is no stranger to all of us. Father Seamus is currently the Chief of Faith Consistent Investing for the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate. He will be the moderator for our program. Father Seamus.
So, good to see everyone, and thanks for inviting me back. I feel like I'm surrounded by true Texans tonight, since I'm coming from the capital of the country there, where we do a lot of talking. We don't get an awful lot done, but there you go. I have two missions from the leadership here, is to say a few words about some new work that we're doing, and then I'll introduce Mario and Virginia, who are really the stars of the evening in terms of trying to give us a real sense of what is important in terms of some of the environmental and challenges that communities face. Anna already mentioned a few of the things that are new that we've been doing, but let me just list a couple of them. Black Lives Matter made a huge impact on the country as a whole, and has organized local communities all over the country in terms of being on the street, speaking their piece, and claiming their authority to be able to fight for such things as equality and equity and inclusion, and not to be taken for granted. And that's those two things together, Black Lives Matter and diversity, equity, and inclusion, are now very important priorities in ICCR. If you had looked at it 5 years ago, you would not have seen that. So lots of initiatives in terms of pushing companies who had for a lot of years filled out government surveys in terms of their diversity of their workforce, the EEO and all of those, and we looked at those, but nothing seemed to change very quickly. And now, as you can see in the program from SRIC, a number of companies have received resolutions to just at least give us a sense of what the diversity profile of their employees are. What's the diversity profile of senior management? And how are they actually putting in place opportunities for people to achieve some of those senior level jobs that they've felt excluded from for years. The second one I want to talk about is what I think is a really significant turn towards nature. And this is coming to the fore in two ways. You'll see sometimes if you're reading the business section of the newspaper these days, they'll talk about nature-based solutions, or including nature in the conversation. And the more technical terms that you'll see in the academic world are biomimicry. In other words, can we look at how nature handles some of the challenges and the opportunities that are out there, and can we learn from them, so that there might be some methods that we can relearn and reintroduce into our ways of organizing local communities. And I think much of the credit for this should go to the Native American communities across the United States and across the world. Our brothers and sisters in Canada have always had a much more advanced arrangement in terms of governance with their First Peoples and First Nations, and so that you'll see that they have rightfully claimed some of the land which was theirs in the past and are self-governing in those places. Now we're beginning to see some of that as well, but it's a little slower. We forgot about all those treaties that got signed in the 19th century and simply disregarded them in most instances. And the important thing, I think, is that the native peoples and traditions, they persevered and they hung in there. And they have slowly brought along, with the help of many others, but taught their young people their customs, their language, their traditions, and helped them to understand those very complicated treaties, and gone to court to claim their rights. Funny thing, I was at I once in a while decide I've had enough of reading or whatever I'm doing, and I go to the theater. And so on the spur of the moment the other night in Washington, I saw a play. It said, "At the Far End." That's all the title was, "At the Far End." And I said, looks interesting. Looked a little bit about it at the author of the play, and it's a biographical play about the story of a family who were dislodged from their homeland in North Carolina, in Georgia, and Mississippi, and were part of that journey of the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, right? The opening line of the play goes like this: at the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise, right? I said, wow, that's very powerful. That's the opening line that comes out. And then you look, and as you go through the play, those are exactly the same words that Justice Gorsuch wrote in the decision that the state of Oklahoma lost 4 or 5 years ago when the Creek Nation took their land claim to the Supreme Court. At the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise. And they go on to basically tell you it's a promise that was not fulfilled. It's a promise that was not kept. So I think for the work that we're doing that includes much of what's out there in nature and much of what we have to learn, I think clearly, in my estimation, the first word of recognition needs to go to the native peoples who inhabited this continent much before any of our ancestors got here. And through their customs and traditions and ways of doing things, were able indeed to be much more respectful of the earth and of the planet, and still have an awful lot to teach us. We're so happy that they're now a significant part of the conversation at ICCR. They're able to share their stories. They're able to tell us about what they've researched and what they've learned, and invite us to be a part of the effort to address this. And as I think Sister Elizabeth already said, it's not that all the corporations are against this or all government authorities are against this. There are people out there who get the message and who have put in place substantive dialogues with these tribal groups across the country. As a matter of fact, this week begins at the United Nations in New York, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. That's been going on now for a little more than 20 years, where indigenous leaders from all over the world, about 5,000 of them actually, get together and take over the building in New York and bring just an amazing array of color, of customs, of music that's not usually noted when you see the pictures of the Security Council sitting there around in a circle. This is a whole different kind of experience. So I think the other part of this is that we've begun individually in our own way as well to kind of reconnect with nature and try and see what it is we've forgotten that our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents knew. And just when it comes to eating and food and all of those things, we've begun again to appreciate the benefits of all of those. Had a number of Cambodians staying at our house in Washington this past weekend because Lowell, Massachusetts took in a lot of refugees after they got out of Cambodia and Thailand after the Vietnam War. And so now a number of them are friends of my family, but they brought along their cooking skills and took over our kitchen. And they were just so excited we have a fairly big vegetable garden behind our house. And they must have spent, 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon just chopping vegetables and preparing different sauces and going out and finding a new leaf or a new nut that they could add to their recipes. And the hot stuff, us Irish kind of left that aside, but the sweeter sauces were very good, I've got to tell you. The last thing I want to mention is that I think we've turned the focus very much in some of the ICCR work, and Anna already mentioned this, to those who are impacted by the work of corporations and by the decisions that are made very far away from where they live, but they end up bearing the heaviest burden because it's their communities, it's their houses, it's their neighborhoods that often get obviously negatively impacted because there's an oil refinery here, there's an LNG terminal over there, there's a lot of truck trafficking going through the streets 24 hours a day, you name it. And their voice is not in the room to be able at least to speak their truth. I think that's a new emphasis for we're still using our position as shareholders with some of these companies to gain access, but being able to bring some of those people into the room to speak in their own name and to tell their own stories and the experience of their own families has become a very important priority as well. So I could go on. Love to talk about artificial intelligence or chatbots, and I'm sure you'd really love that too. But that's a whole other field, right? It's really important. It's about speed, it's about data, it's about impacting our lives in ways that we don't have much of an idea of what's coming. We're grateful to those folks who are working in that space, who are at least trying to break it down into ways that it can explain to us that we do need regulation in terms of where your cell phone is being used or how you're using it, or what kind of data they're collecting about you, your family, your neighborhood, and how it's rolling over onto the marketing advertising side. And indeed happening with at a rate of speed that you and I can't even imagine. We have some Amazon stores up our way there in DC these days, and the Amazon stores, in case you haven't been in them, you don't have to go to the cash register at all, right? You just put your credit card in when you go in, collect whatever it is you want to buy, then you drive the shopping cart out between those two radar readers that like that you see at the airport, and they just deduct the amount of money from your credit card. So no personal interaction, no cashier to chat with, none of those magazines that you can buy to attract your attention. That's all gone. It's a very clean, sanitized experience from what we used to know. Let me close by mentioning just one other thing that's not specifically in this field, but I want to read to you just a paragraph from an opinion piece that was in the New York Times last Friday. It's and some of you may already read Tish Harrison Warren's stuff, which is in the Times on a weekly basis. April is my favorite month in Austin, my hometown. The banks along the highways burst with wildflowers. Bluebonnets preside over dainty pink buttercups, playing with bold black-eyed Susans. Trees glisten with their chirpy new green. Birds enthusiastically pass on news, waking me up each morning. The air drops hints of the summer heat way too soon to come, but it isn't unpleasant yet. It's just warm enough to be tempted to splay out on a lawn chair and doze off. Or better yet, to stay awake and take it all in. My favorite time of day during my favorite month, which is now, is evening, when the sky stripes turquoise and coral. There's a distinct smell that blankets the evenings. Grassy, mossy, fresh, and earthy. I remember even as a kid feeling like there was something in that scent that turned the air spiritual, magic, and electric. It's the smell of anticipation and life, making me feel like the waning light, which stretches out longer each evening, holds endless possibilities. I want to slow down time this year. I almost feel a duty to do so, to make sure this time does not pass without me noticing it properly. I'm eager to drink it in, and I strain to listen, as in the words of the psalm, the heavens declare the glory of God, and I want to hear what they say. With that being said, worth taking a look at the whole. I'll send the link for the article. It's only a couple of pages to Anna, and she can share it with you if you wish. But it goes on to be a reflection on the season of Easter and paying attention to nature and paying attention to it and slowing down enough to allow it to feed us spiritually, to feed us actually, to take in the materiality of what's there in a very special way. And very much the title of the article is Praying Actually with Your Eyes Open, whereas most of us pray with our eyes shut. Enough being said. Our two guests, Mario and Virginia, why don't you come up this way and we'll say hello. So you have a program, and it tells you who these two wonderful people are. And Sister Elizabeth already mentioned that since most of us in the room already know what Medicare and Social Security is, it's good to see the two of them as a newer generation in the journey. Virginia is the executive director of Commission Shift, a nonpartisan advocacy organization building public support to reform oil and gas oversight in Texas through accountability at the Railroad Commission. That was a real learning for me, I have to tell you, the first time that I learned that the Railroad Commission is interested in a lot of other things besides railroads. So the rest you can take a look at in the program, and so I won't take up too much time. Mario, there you are, is a City of San Antonio councilman representing District 1. Like many San Antonians, Mario's story is a blend of cultures with his ancestors from Europe, European immigrants and Mexicans who have lived in Texas since it was part of Mexico. He has a passion for public policy because it sets the foundation for the justice and opportunity we seek. So I won't delay any longer, but introduce them to offer some remarks. Afterwards, we'll take time to take some questions and any comments you might have. Who's going to go first? Virginia, you're.
We're about to flip a coin. Well, thanks for having me here tonight. I have heard about the Socially Responsible Investment Coalition for a long time, and I'm really pleased to be meeting you all tonight and learning more about how the organization works and the great work that you're doing, which is very complementary to the work that I've been doing. It's been hard for me to think about where to start tonight with this talk and with Sister Elizabeth. You know, we've been doing this work for well over a decade, and you know, it's been so great to have Sister Elizabeth as a person to do this work alongside. You know, we've been on so many tours throughout the Eagleford Shale, advocating for an end to venting and flaring from oil and gas wells, and advocating for clean air protections for communities, and meeting with people who are dealing with the very real health impacts from this widespread commercial industrial development. And it's not easy. You know, there's been a lot of setbacks along the way, and you know, we keep on keeping on because that's the right thing to do. And you know, I was talking to somebody recently who does a lot of really great political organizing, and she said a simple phrase, and you probably have heard it before, but it really gave me a little hope and kind of brought me back, and that was the only way to beat organized money is to create organized people, right? And so this is an interesting group because y'all have both. So, so that gives you a lot of power. And I think that's a good segue into what I was thinking about a lot on the drive up here today about what I wanted to talk to you all about is kind of a framework of thinking about the work that we do. And what I've been thinking about lately is acknowledging and understanding the power that I hold as an individual and the different identities that I have and the different institutions that I'm a part of, and how I can take up space in those institutions and in these spaces to create the change that I want to see in the world. And so I think, you know, first you have to have sort of a mission, right? And what you want to do, and then you're kind of figuring out what your place is and all of that. So I'll talk a little bit about my life story. I was told to have 20 minutes, so get ready now. So I grew up in Encinal. It's a small town in South Texas, and I grew up on a ranch. Encinal has a population of about 600 people. And the ranch that I grew up on was right next door to Rod Lewis, who is a big oil and gas producer down in South Texas. My dad was an oil and gas attorney, and I never thought much about it when I was a kid. I didn't really know that about my dad, that he was an attorney that focused on oil and gas. And it wasn't until I graduated from college and decided that I wanted to stop climate change that all of these pieces started to kind of come into my awareness, and I started to kind of realize where I fit in this space. So I went to undergrad to become a pilot. And Sister Elizabeth just learned this about me tonight. But I got a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Science from a school in Florida. And I graduated, and I was studying to be a flight instructor. And I was studying really hard and trying to prepare all these lesson plans, and nothing was really clicking for me. And then I realized that the thing that I really cared most about and was most interested in at that point in my life was climate change. And so I made the decision to follow my heart and drop this degree that I had just gotten, and change careers. And so, I went out to California, and I got a job at AmeriCorps, which is a service program. And I was doing a lot of climate education in California. And I started to meet people who were also doing a lot of habitat restoration and climate education out there, who were from there. And I realized that they knew so much about that place where they were from. And I realized that they were the right people to be doing that work. And I also met people who were trying to recruit me to go down to places like Nicaragua and teach people about how to properly throw trash in garbage cans and recycling bins, and not to litter. And I thought, my hometown has a littering problem, and my hometown doesn't even have recycling. And so why am I thinking about going to all these other places like California or Nicaragua when the problems really are at home? And so I started to realize that my frame of reference of what I could do or should do in the world, really could, that my power could really be most beneficial back home. And so I ended up deciding to go to graduate school. And, I did a lot of work trying to figure out where the best place would be to end up. And, strangely, I didn't take myself back to Texas yet, but I ended up in North Carolina. I went to Duke, and I got a master's of environmental management. And between my first and second years of graduate school, I went back to Laredo, and I interned with the local environmental nonprofit down there, which is called Rio Grande International Study Center, RISC. And it was 2011, and the Eagleford shale boom was just starting to take off. And my friend, before I went out there, had told me, hey, there's this new thing called fracking or hydraulic fracturing. Have you heard of it? It sounds kind of dangerous. And so when I ended up down there, we ended up learning that this was a thing that could be really dangerous in our region. And we gave a lot of presentations, and we held town halls. And the Railroad Commission came to our town halls. And that was how I learned that the Railroad Commission has nothing to do with railroads. That this is our state oil and gas agency, and they haven't had any jurisdiction over railroads since 2005. And that was also where I learned that state agencies don't necessarily have to advocate for the needs of the public. They can advocate for the needs of the businesses they're supposed to regulate. And that is an unfortunate truth in Texas, and that is something that we need to organize people to change in Texas. And so I ended up, after that, over at Environmental Defense Fund after grad school, and I was an analyst on the oil and gas team. And I got to work on all kinds of issues, from water quality to air quality and methane emissions. And I worked on policies in a lot of different states because it was considered to be more feasible to pass some of the changes that needed to be passed in other states than it was in Texas. And I was working out of the Austin office, and I thought being in the Texas office of EDF would mean that I would get to change things in Texas. But I think there was always this implicit understanding that if we needed to go to the Railroad Commission for something, they probably wouldn't listen because most of their campaign donations came from the same companies they were regulating. And they all were allowed to have personal financial interests in the same companies they were overseeing on the commission. And so I remember asking, I was like, well, does somebody have a movement to change that? Like, if we're not going to do it, is somebody doing it? And it took me a while to realize that nobody was doing that work. And it was painfully obvious to me that there's no way that we were going to win on climate until we solved that problem. And so many years later, here we are, and I've created commission shifts so that I could solve that problem and get at the ethical problems with the Railroad Commission and make sure that we have a state agency overseeing oil and gas development that puts the people of Texas first. One of the things that I had the pleasure of working on when I was at EDF was a project called Neighbors of Oil and Gas. And one of the people that we hired to work on that project and do most of the organizing was Mario Bravo. And so we designed a project where we would go around to different counties in the Eagle Ford Shale that were predominantly Spanish speaking and teach them about the potential impacts of oil and gas development and who to call when something went wrong. That's just basic information that everybody should have, but that nobody was getting. And the Railroad Commission does not provide any information on its website in Spanish about how to report an incident. And so I think we filled a real need there, and I had the pleasure of working with Mario to do that. And so let's see. Yeah, I mean, I think I want to get back to this discussion of power. I have really appreciated the transparency that Sister Elizabeth has brought to her work. I'm also a land and mineral owner in Webb County, and it took me a long time to really be transparent about being a mineral owner because I was a climate advocate first and foremost. And I was a little embarrassed about that. But coming into this work with Commission Shift, I have realized that if we're truly going to transition, we have to acknowledge truths that are uncomfortable sometimes, and I think we also have to get away from a purist mindset about what it means to solve the climate crisis and what it means to be an environmentalist. We're working now with a lot of folks that come from the industry who, are benefiting from the oil and gas industry. But if we want to get to a future where people are not impacted by air pollution from fossil fuels and where people are not impacted by water pollution from fossil fuels, we have to have really tough discussions, and we have to be really honest about what the solutions are going to be. And so I want to thank Sister Elizabeth for being a model for me, for showing that there's a way to do something good with this type of identity and with the power that we do hold. And so let's see, I was asked, the prompt that I was given for tonight was to give some advice about how we can do better, more environmentally just investments. And there were so many really cool things that were talked about before I came up here. And so I do want to touch on a couple of quick topics that are really timely right now. And so as investors, I want you all to be really cognizant of these terms that are getting thrown around, like net zero and low carbon fuels, and even clean energy and new green economy. One of the technologies that is emerging is called carbon capture and storage. This is a situation where they'll capture carbon dioxide from a fossil fuel source that's emitting carbon dioxide. they'll liquefy it, put it into a pipeline, and then inject it underground. And we just testified on some bills a couple of weeks ago in the legislature that would remove all liability from companies during operation, and that would specifically declare that carbon dioxide is not a nuisance or a pollutant. And so it would make it very difficult to sue a company if something went wrong. And so there was a case in Mississippi with Denbury Gulf Coast Pipeline, which is a Texas company. They had a CO2 pipeline explosion, and people who drove through the CO2 plume suffocated, and dozens of people went to the hospital. I talked to one guy who has permanent short-term memory loss, so he can't cook food on the stove anymore, he can't get a job, his daughters had to move out because he can't work. This is something that can have really serious impacts on people. There was another, I was telling Sister Elizabeth, somebody testified at that hearing and talked about drilling through a CO2 acid gas plume that he knew was there and that he took safety precautions with, and it ate all the way through his 5-inch drill bit within 12 hours. And so we have to be really careful about all of the other things that come from our climate solutions. And this is what it means to think about climate justice, right? And environmental justice is, it's not always about carbon dioxide. It's not always about the single pollutant that we are trying to regulate or deal with or manage. It's about all the other parts of the supply chain. It's about all the other things that can go wrong as well, you know? So it's about water, it's about air quality, and it's about whether people really have agency to stand up for themselves when something goes wrong. And so there was something that was said earlier that just made me think about this era that we're in right now. And I think what it really is a kind of like maximized colonization, you know? And so we're in this era where we've been kind of going through this period of colonization for so long that we have very little power as individuals, right? And that is why it is so important for us to be organized as people, to slow things down a little so that we can regain our power. You know, Mario and I are many generation Texans. I'm a 9th generation Texan, and so I think, are you also a descendant of the founders of Laredo?
I don't know.
Your bio indicated that, and so
Everybody from Laredo's related, though.
yeah, it's true. And so I'm 9th generation from that, so it's like, you know, I'm a descendant of the people who colonized Laredo, but I'm also part Native American, part indigenous, right? And so this is kind of the mix of people that we come from. But in that, you know, I've witnessed that we've had to assimilate, right? We've had to let go of our culture in many ways, and I don't say that in a good way. And I think, one of the painful truths that we have to look at, many of us as Catholics too, is that the Catholic Church has been a big part of that colonization and of the forced assimilation, right? I remember as a kid growing up in the church, and when people were practicing with native plants or doing native rituals with plants, it was called curanderia, or witchcraft, right? And we were told that that was sacrilege and that people shouldn't do that. And my family was a part of enforcing that rule with the Catholic Church. And talking about nature-based solutions, I mean, yeah, the alternative to doing geologic carbon sequestration is nature-based solutions and bringing back soil health throughout the United States. And to be able to do that, we have to return to valuing native plants and valuing the uses of native plants. I spent a lot of time during the pandemic. I've been living back on my family's ranch. Well, now it's my ranch. And I spent a lot of time during the pandemic going on hikes and learning about the plants and learning what they're used for, or what they used to be used for. And I think one of the sad things that I've learned is that there's not a lot of information out there, and we're losing that indigenous knowledge and we're losing that indigenous history. about our native plants. And it's hard to value something that you can't name, and it's hard to value something that you know nothing about. And what I'm seeing down in Webb County right now is massive industrial development along I-35. This has been going on at least since the Eagleford Shale started booming, but it's increasing more rapidly, right? And certainly, you know, y'all talk about Amazon. Certainly, the rise of consumerism is affecting it too. You know, Laredo is the #1 port in the United States, and so it's lots of commercial trucks. It's not only oil and gas development, it's lots of commercial trucking and forwarding facilities that we're seeing. And yeah, it's really an expansion of highway corridors and loss of habitat. There's a biologist in Laredo at the local university who says you can still go out into the Monte in South Texas and find new species that haven't been cataloged. And so this just, I'm saying that because there is still so much that we are going to miss out on if we don't return back to indigenous practices very quickly, right? And if we don't start to take care of this planet and this place that we're living in. And so I would just challenge all of us to continue to think locally in this work. Have an awareness of your power and the place that you sit in your institutions, in your organizations, in your identity, and be rooted in that, have an awareness of it, and, you know, use it to accomplish a community objective. I think we can all do that. So thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Marty Bravo, and I feel very privileged to be here with you all and to be able to share a stage that Sister Elizabeth was just up here on. You know, as a city council member, I get invited to events where you honor or celebrate somebody, you give them an award on a regular basis, and I can't think of anybody who deserves an award more than Sister Elizabeth. And it's also a huge honor to be able to be up here on the stage with Virginia Palacio. So, you know, what I guess, I don't think, she mentioned that she worked on Neighbors of Oil and Gas, but she was really humble about it because she created Neighbors of Oil and Gas, and she created the job that I got right out of grad school. She, you know, wrote the grant to get the funding to be able to hire me. And I've learned so much from Virginia. I actually, when I saw that she was going to be up here with me, I thought, why did they even invite me? You know, like, like pretty much all I know I learned from Virginia. Oh, and Sister Elizabeth. But so I grew up in Laredo up till 3rd grade and moved here to San Antonio, and I went to UT Austin. And when I was there, I come from a family who's always been civically involved, right? And some I have there are people on both sides of my family who have been elected officials, but you know, everybody in my family on both sides, they're very civically engaged. You know, volunteering in the neighborhood was not a choice when I was a kid. You know, whatever, planting stuff in the neighborhood park, whatever it is, mowing the lawn at the neighborhood park, fixing things up. And so I grew up in a family where we were always contributing to the community. All the kids in my neighborhood grew up at my house. You know, we fed everybody hung out at my house. We always had people coming and living with us because when we had extra space. And when I got to college, I met a gentleman who was best friends with Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock when he was growing up. He ran Bob Bullock's first campaign. And so by the time I met him, he was retired, and he was just mentoring young people. And so I was one of the very lucky people to get mentored by him. And so I was bit by the political bug. I started working on political campaigns. I did that for a good while. And then I decided I wanted to transition into working in clean energy somehow, or energy efficiency. And I couldn't get a job anywhere. I couldn't get my foot in the door for an interview anywhere. I guess, you know, the HR departments would look at my resume and they couldn't, you know, see how my job skills could transfer to what they were looking for. And so I decided I needed to retool. And so I went to grad school and I studied at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. And the first job I applied for when I got out was working for Environmental Defense Fund. I was familiar with them. I was a big fan. And luckily, Virginia had created this job that was a good fit for me. And I learned so much from Virginia and other coworkers there. I worked there for 7 years. Right up until about the time that I ran for city council here in San Antonio. And there's so many things I could talk about right now. When I think of environmental justice, let me start with an uncomfortable truth, because Virginia mentioned uncomfortable truths. I think one uncomfortable truth is, there are a lot of environmental advocates here in the city that don't like me and don't believe in the work I do. And what I'm focused on very much is results. And so sometimes when we try to get things perfect and we end up fighting amongst ourselves and we don't get anything done. And I'll tell you, a huge frustration I've had is, the city in 2017, the city of San Antonio passed a non-binding resolution to meet the Paris Climate Agreement goals. That was in June of 2017. Then they said we were going to take 1.5 years to create a climate plan. And instead of 18 months, it took 28 months. And we got commitments so that we're going to do stuff to make progress in the meantime. We said 18 months is too long, but we understand it's going to be a public process. There's going to be multiple partners, and so that's fine. If we want to get it right and we want public input, then we understand it can take 18 months, but let's do things to reduce emissions in the meantime. And we didn't, and it took 28 months. And then it took another year. After the climate plan passed, it took a year to create a climate implementation, the implementation committee to be able to seat people on there. And, here we are. Now it's been almost, what we're in April. In 2 months, it'll be 6 years since we set that goal. And I can't think of anything that we've done to implement any of this. And there has been a lot of fighting about how to get things just right, how to get things perfect. And so one thing I do as a councilman is I focus on where can I make a difference. So I'm the downtown council member. I have more than downtown, but I have pretty much all of downtown. And so I get to sit on these tax increment reinvestment zones, right? And that's something where typically people will look at these situations and you get to give out incentives to developers, basically, right? Like tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. I sit on 3 of these. And so what I started doing is I said, forget the climate plan. I'm going to leverage this money. Somebody wants to come and they want to build a new building downtown or near downtown. They want to build a 1,000-unit development. I'm going to tell them, okay, what are you doing? What are you going to, you want $6 million? What are you going to do to go above and beyond the standard energy building code, right? Because we don't have a stable electric grid here in San Antonio or in Texas. We don't have a stable electric grid, right? And we need to reduce our energy consumption per capita. And so I'm leveraging these funds. And when I talk to a developer and they come and they pitch their project, I'll tell everybody, I'm not just talking to you. I want everybody in this room to listen. Anybody who's ever going to bring me a project on this, on this tax, in front of this tax increment reinvestment zone, anybody who's going to bring a project here, I want you to know that's a question I'm going to ask. And that's a bar you're going to have to be able to meet if you want to get my vote on this project. So that's one thing I do. I mean, another thing, when I think of environmental justice is, how are we protecting our most vulnerable? And, Virginia and I both have a mutual friend, Doug Lewin, who's a thought leader in Texas when it comes to energy. And so I learn a lot from him too. And one thing I learned from Doug is that the state of Texas estimated what our peak energy use was our peak energy demand was going to be in the state of Texas during the last cold snap that we had. I think it was, it might have been in late December when it got down to 15 degrees. And so they estimated what our peak energy demand would be, and they missed it by 13 gigawatts, I believe, which is about the amount of electricity that's used by the greater area of Houston. And so they were completely off. And the way they were off, the reason they found out that they were off was because there's a lot of old housing stock in Texas, and a lot of these houses don't have any insulation, or they have very little insulation. Or my girlfriend's going to kill me on this. She always wants me to give credit to whoever I learned something from, and I'm not going to be able to remember right now. But there's a lot of these houses are very drafty, right? And I met a priest who told me, he said, "Councilman, we call those holy houses." Those drafty houses. But I wish I could remember who that was that told me that, because I love that line. But so what they found is, so there's a lot of low-income people who, they have these holy houses, they have these houses that are lacking insulation, and they go to Home Depot, they go to Walmart, they go to Target, and they buy these little space heaters. Some people say they're kind of like toaster ovens that you plug in, and with a toaster oven with a fan, right? And they run nonstop, because you can't hold that heat into your house with the drafty house without lacking that insulation. And so that's where a lot of energy is being used right there, right? And so one thing I focus on is, we have, in San Antonio, we own our own energy utility, CPS Energy. And so CPS Energy, since I got into office, we approved their energy efficiency program for another 5 years. And I think it's about $75 million a year. And but the way they've been operating is they announce programs for low-income people, and you can come and you can apply. You can go online, or you can go to a CPS Energy office, and you can apply for these funds. And what I've told them is, look, we have to be proactive. Let's look at the data. And so let's go look at low-income census tracts or low-income zip codes, and let's look at how much you have the data of how much energy everybody's using. And so match that data up with real estate data that we can get from the county that shows how many square feet that each house is, and look at who's using the most electricity per square foot. And then take the top 10% energy users and go knock their doors and say, hey, did you know that you use more electricity than 90% of your neighbors? And we have a free program where we can come in and insulate your home. And CPS Energy just released a report. When they do this, they can help an individual, the average person whose house is insulated by them saves $450 a year. And so that's a way where we can reduce our energy consumption, but we can also help protect our most vulnerable, the low-income people who need to be protected against these high energy bills. And so, I just look for any opportunity that I can outside of the climate plan. And so I'm not a big believer in climate plans. I think when when a community sets their sights on creating a climate plan, sometimes it's just kicking the can down the road. And that's what I feel like I've experienced. But I'm very happy to be here and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
So thank you both very much. Those were very informative for a non-Texan. So thank you for bringing us up to speed. And lots of folks out here acknowledged. And I think it's been important for all of us since the Pope Francis encyclical Laudato Si identified climate change straight up front, climate change and biodiversity. And we know that there is an ongoing global process of the Conference of Parties. I think the 28th one is coming up this November, where globally they're trying to deal with the question of climate change. But one of the things the Holy Father constantly reminds people about is that the transition from fossil fuel energy to alternative energies, the burden of that transition cannot be placed on the poor and the vulnerable. And he's had many sessions in Rome with major oil and gas companies, and that's the question that he's continually asking. What is your transition plan? And they may say 10 years or 15 years, and he said, I'd love it to be 5. And so he's a clear advocate on this question that, as you all know, we all set timelines or deadlines or whatever we call them, and we like to be able to say we got there ahead of the timeline we set, but it takes hard work, and it's not, it's a complicated issue. Somebody mentioned earlier, it was, I think, Sister Elizabeth, that when industry comes to town, they're bringing jobs, and they're not always on the energy side, the cleanest jobs, the healthiest jobs, but they're jobs. And so the trade-off is, how do I get from this job to a job that's involved with cleaner energy? But it's exciting, I think, from my perspective anyway, that the number of communities across the country who are taking this seriously, and the search for the transition away from fossil fuels to alternative energies. And whether it's putting solar panels on your roof or doing windmills or geothermal, we're doing all sorts of incremental pieces, and collectively, hopefully, they're going to move us along. So we can take some time. Anybody have any questions for our illustrious guests here, a comment you'd like to make? We had some microphones back there somewhere, Susan. All right. Just raise your hand if you have a comment or a question you'd like to make. Yeah, sure. Can you, oh, sorry, yeah, good. Thank you. I was going to invite you to do that. Thank you. Well, we need the microphone up here. Just one of them. Can you bring it up? Well, it's just in case, Elizabeth, that's all. You've got a good,
Thank you.
go to it.
My goodness, I turn around and here's Bishop Pfeiffer, one of our biggest social justice. Let's give him a huge round of applause.
Oh, my God.
Thank you,
Wait
Bishop
a
Pfeiffer,
minute.
for being here. One of your oblate brothers. Okay, and it's always a privilege to be with you, Bishop. You're one of the trailblazers for social justice in the state, so thank you. My question is, in your city, you're in touch with the Railroad Commission at the state level, and some people in this room may not be aware of what we called a few years ago Darby 40.
What is that?
Oh, it's clean, Father.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you. I feel better already.
Darby was a state legislator from San Angelo, top Greene County, the lower southeastern corner of the huge Permian boom out there. He's also an oil and gas attorney. He sponsored a bill, 40, HB 40, which said, and he rammed it through. I went to some of those hearings. It was amazing how this man just rammed it through, and I thought, doesn't anybody realize what's happening? But the bill said, no city council, no city entity can have any authority any longer over any placement of oil or gas facilities within the city limits. That was a response to Denton's city resolution. So my question is, how do you see that impacting life within the city of San Antonio or within small towns? And of course, you're not in favor of it, I'm sure. But I think that we need to realize that's a huge thing we have to change in the legislature.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so House Bill 40 was a local control bill. So it said if you couldn't have an ordinance that would prohibit hydraulic fracturing or fracking within city limits if it was going to prevent somebody from accessing the minerals, right? And so I haven't seen it. So what happened in Laredo that was really kind of phenomenal, around the same time that HB 40 was getting passed, there was expected to be drilling within city limits from one energy company in Laredo. I think it was Laredo Energy. And there was a big organizing effort by RISC, the local environmental nonprofit, and they got a contract with the company saying that they were going to abide by certain air quality protections and things. It was unenforceable, but the company ended up not drilling those wells. I don't know if it was because of the effort, but I think that the effort had something to do with it. And I think the price of oil plunging also had something to do with it. But we are also, I don't know the extent to which urban drilling has been happening in San Antonio, because I think the Eagle Ford Shale is maybe a little more towards the southern end of Bear. But we have seen a lot of urban drilling up in Arlington, and there's a great nonprofit called Livable Arlington that has been doing a ton of advocacy to protest drilling permits next to childcare facilities, schools, hospitals, things like that. And so please go follow them and sign up for their email list and follow them on social media, because they really have a lot of people suffering from the impact of that development, who are living right next to it. And that's also happening because of international companies coming to Texas to develop these minerals. And so companies like Total in France that do not allow, France doesn't allow any hydraulic fracking within that country, but they will come over here and do it to be able to access our resources. And there's a huge push right now to export Texas natural gas to Europe. So very complicated stuff. Oh, but on the issue of local control, there's actually a super state preemption bill that's in the legislature right now, and I can get the number for you later, but it would prevent municipalities from having local regulations on almost any issue, not just hydraulic fracturing. So that's a really dangerous bill that we need to kill.
2127?
I don't know, but that sounds great.
So, one thing that a lot of people in nonprofits don't know about, or the people don't know about nonprofits, is I think you can spend 15% of your time on political advocacy. And so, as soon as I joined the Environmental Defense Fund, House Bill 40 was filed. And so one of the first things I had to do is Virginia and another coworker, they gave me lists of people, state reps to call all up and down the state of Texas. And we broke that list up, and we're calling them, trying to find people who would vote against this bill. And obviously we weren't successful, but it's gotten worse since then. It gets worse every time our legislature meets. And so I'm glad that Virginia spoke first. It gave me some time to get on my phone and look this up. So we have a online journalism publication called San Antonio Report here, and the second article that they have on their website right now is Texas House approves sweeping limits on local regulations in GOP's latest jab at blue cities. In a major escalation of Republicans' efforts to weaken the state's bluer cities and counties, lawmakers in the Texas legislature are advancing a pair of bills that would seize control of local regulations that could range from worker protections to water restrictions during droughts. So one time the Texas Tribune puts on the Tribune Festival in Austin with a lot of policymakers and elected officials. And I remember years ago seeing a debate, and it was local control versus control the locals. And there's a lot of interest in controlling the locals and just taking away municipal power. And San Antonio is a home rule state. And so I forget what the other version is. For a lot of smaller towns, they just take a set of rules that's uniform across the state. But if you're a big enough city and you want to create your own rules, you can become a home rule city. And a home rule city can pass any law they want, as long as the state legislature doesn't pass a law specifically prohibiting them from doing that. And our legislature meets every 2 years, and every 2 years they just start taking away more power and taking away more power and taking away more power. The first time I learned about this was in right around 2008, I think. And in the city of Austin decided to pass an ordinance that when you sell your house, you have to have an energy audit done. And so people can see, is that an energy efficient home, or is it inefficient, right? And that's useful, just like when you go to buy a car and there's a window sticker and it says the EPA estimates that this is how many miles per gallon this car is going to get on the highway, this is what it's going to get in the city, and it lets you know, okay, well, this is how much I have budgeted for my car, and this is how many miles I drive a year, and I can kind of estimate what's my gas bill going to be like, right? And so can I afford this car and the gas bill collectively together, right? Same concept with a house. Can I afford the mortgage payment and the energy bills, right? And so they passed that ordinance, and immediately the state legislature passed a law taking away their ability to, they said you can have that rule, but you can't fine anybody for not following it. And so there's So the law exists on the books in Austin, but it's not enforceable in any way. And so that's the climate we're living in politically right now.
Any other comments or questions? Any struggles that you've been having with energy and alternative energy that you want to lift up? Sure.
Well, thank you for that presentation. Gives me a lot of hope. Incarnate Word Sisters, I am an Incarnate Word Sister. And when I heard you, and I thought there are big issues dealing with big, powerful people. I mean, there are lots of issues, but there is also the small things that each one can do. And we are doing, and in my head, I was saying, keep doing it, like you are going in the right direction. We do compost, we change the bulbs, the lights. I'm kind of competitive, so I always check my CPS bill and I see, because they say, look, who is consuming more than you or less than you, or you. So I am who is consuming less than me. So in my, and I really try to be in the lower, I really try. So kind of all this is an incentive. But there is younger generations than me. She didn't come today, but there is a sister who is really very challenging. She has a big dream for environment, and she has approached me and said, when are we changing to solar, to more really go big? To this big building, we have a retirement facility, so that's her target. And I'm like, oh my God, that's enormous, humongous. So, but I really want to answer to her. I really want not to say, we cannot do that, but kind of what would you recommend? How could we plan for that future that is not going to happen maybe this year, but kind of an incentive to look forward to make it happen sometime?
And I'm sure are there lots of subsidies, Texas, for solar, or is that well dry? Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of them, obviously, as you know, across the country in different jurisdictions, but it is a local jurisdiction issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, the way energy efficiency kind of works in Texas is we all pay a little bit on our utility bills, and then it goes into a big pot. And then the utilities can use that to provide energy efficiency to the communities. And San Antonio has its own program, just like Mario was talking about. But there aren't a lot of solar incentives out there. And in fact, what we're seeing from the state legislature is finding ways to kneecap renewable energy and make it more expensive. We've heard a lot of yapping about the free market from Texas legislators, but what we are seeing is deliberately making renewables less economic and providing lots of incentives and tax exemptions to fossil fuels. And so it's pretty transparent, and it's really contrary to the idea that, that there's a free market value out there. So yeah, it's not looking good in Texas right now, but I think, what we do have right now that we can all benefit from is, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. Like, it's been such a double-edged sword with that, because there are all these incentives coming out for renewables. There's going to be a ton of money coming in through green banks. I'm on the board of the Clean Energy Fund of Texas, which is the first green bank in Texas. And so there will be federal funds that are filtered through those banks for renewable energy and energy efficiency in low-income communities and communities of color, which is great. But yeah, I think what we're seeing at the state legislature is like trying to hamper that as much as possible. And the other side of the sword with, I guess, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the IRA is that they are allowing tax credits for carbon capture and storage, which I was just talking about, which is, going to bring a lot of risks to our community too. So we have to be careful.
Can you just repeat what you said?
Yeah, so with wind energy, we're seeing that they're trying to add more requirements for that type of infrastructure so that it costs more, which, you know, it's not great for consumers in Texas. Because right now, wind is one of the most affordable types of electricity to have on the grid.
Yeah.
San Antonio does have incentives for solar, and just now I am heard
Hold on a second.
a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe, there were incentives in San Antonio for solar. So I got them, but now as I have a Nest and I can control it from anywhere, I can leave my house since I'm one person on home away. And now I'm getting offers for rewards for that. And my bill is sometimes $8.75 a month. So there are $8.75.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's,
Haven't figured out the gas bill yet. But there are incentives and there are rewards. So that's a good news.
I'm going to talk about, I guess, equity a little bit. So here in San Antonio with CPS Energy, we started to phase out those solar rebates. And, you know, part of, I guess, what we've learned over time is that, you know, in order to get a solar rebate, you have to be able to afford to build out a solar system on your roof, right? And that might cost $10,000 or $20,000. And a lot of low-income people, everybody who has a CPS energy bill, everybody who gets electricity and gas, right, is paying into this fund. But who's benefiting from it, right? And so a lot of low-income people don't have $10,000 or $20,000 in a savings account or under their mattress, so they can go, you know, pay to have a solar system installed and then go get a rebate from their utility afterward. And so CPS Energy, they've evolved in what they've tried with it. They tried doing a program where they would install a solar on your roof. You didn't pay anything, and then they would rent your roof space for you, and you'd get maybe $30 a month off of your electricity bill. But they found that, you know, if you're going to put solar panels on somebody's roof, you want the roof to be relatively new. If it's a very old roof and it's going to have to be replaced in a few years, then it doesn't make sense to build this system, and you're going to have to take it off in 2 or 3 years. So there's a lot of challenges that came with that, and so now they've transitioned to, I think one of the things that they're doing, and I can't speak into a lot of specifics on this because I'm not completely up to date on it, but I think one of the things that we're offering is roofless solar. And so where you can buy solar panels, but it's not necessarily going to be on your roof. That helps for people who, you know, even if you have a new roof, you might have big trees that are shading your house, and so you're not a good candidate. And it just gives other people opportunities there.
sorry. Sure.
I just want to say, I know San Antonio's got its own energy source and it sells its own energy. I think the coal plant's going to be phased out soon, right? It's been talked about a lot, but I think it is actually going to be phased out. So perhaps if San Antonio doesn't always own its own plant, maybe other people can come in and help to supply that. When I moved to Victoria, I got an apartment and I got a list of energy companies, and I could choose my own energy company. And I was surprised to see Green Mountain Energy, and I said, oh, that sounds good. And it's total wind. So I immediately signed up. All my energy every month is supplied by wind. And that was a choice the city of Victoria gave me. Is that possible in San Antonio?
You're the man.
So we used to have a program like that. I don't know if we do anymore. A long time ago, we had a program called Windtricity, and I was a member, and you got to buy in for not very much, and yeah, and you were contributing to more wind farms, and so it wasn't necessarily the electrons that are coming into your house that were wind powered, but you were contributing to enough wind power being put on the San Antonio grid that it covered your electricity use. And so that was a great deal, actually. It ended up, because you could buy, a lot of people bought into it, and then electricity, like I guess maybe natural gas prices went up. And so the people who had bought into electricity had lower electricity bills than others did. It was a great deal. You mentioned, I'm happy to pursue that. I don't know. I don't think we have an option like that anymore. So you mentioned shutting down the coal plant. So the CPS Energy Board of Trustees did vote just a few months ago to move in the direction of converting our newest coal plant to a natural gas plant. And so this plant was built, I think it was completed in 2010. I think it was one of the more recent coal plants that was built in the US. And I'm just not sure that that's a good decision, because there are no climate benefits for converting a coal plant to natural gas. There are air quality benefits. So if you live downstream from this coal plant, you can expect natural gas is going to burn cleaner. So you can expect to have cleaner air, but there aren't climate benefits because there's so many natural gas leaks in the Permian Basin, and that's where we buy most of our natural gas. And those are offsetting all the climate benefits of converting from coal to natural gas.
So we're coming towards the hour. I think the other thing I just wanted to introduce for a sec was, I think the issue of food is also big when it comes to, the challenge that we face when it comes to climate, because an awful lot of the gas that's produced and energy that's used is used in the production of food. So people also need to look at farming. They need to look at local gardening. They need to look at the ways or how far the food that they're eating or purchasing or how far is it traveling to get here, and other ways in which we can cut down on the use side besides all of the things we're doing on the production side. And there's an amazing amount of innovation out there that it's no longer simply a question of getting your shovel or your fork out and digging the soil out there and doing the usual things that we might have learned. But there are just a lot of really different innovative pieces that are small scale. I know people who are just doing some hydroponic gardening in their apartments, right, on the counter in their kitchen, or on the pathway or the walkway going into their home. So I think that's the other side of it as well. We do need to continue to look at energy use and how we can reduce that, and how therefore there's less of a draw on the planet and on the natural environment for the amount of energy we want to use. It's a closing words from these two beautiful people over here, please.
I just, again, want to thank Sister Elizabeth for being a part of this movement. I think your contributions to all of this have been really effective and really helpful, and you've made an impact. And so thank you for devoting so much of your time and your energy and your heart to this work, because we have needed you. So thanks again.
Thank you. I think when I think about sustainability, when I think about climate change, it's often difficult to know what is the right thing to do. It takes so much research. You hear about electric vehicles, and then what all goes into mining all of the elements that go into their batteries, and what does that impact, right? You try to do your best when it comes to recycling, and but then also, are you just contributing to the disposable society that we live in, where we just buy plastic for everything, and everything, you buy a product that comes wrapped in plastic, and you go to the store and they put it in a plastic bag. And that's one pet peeve of mine, I guess, also, is nobody seems to know how to recycle. And it's a challenge because the rules are always changing, and it's different in different communities. So it's difficult, I think, to always know what the right thing to do is. Somebody mentioned composting earlier. You mentioned composting. Well, it turns out I grew up on 25 acres, and we always composted. And so later in life, I still composted in my backyard, but I was a lazy composter. And so, I just throw stuff in a pile, and I wasn't tossing the compost. And then I learned that if you don't, toss your compost, then it doesn't get oxygen, and then you end up creating methane, which is natural gas, and it's a huge climate forcer. And so I was working in the wrong direction there. So it's hard to know what the right thing to do is, but we keep trying, and that's it. Thank
Great.
you.
Sister Susan, are you coming up this way? So we should thank these two great Texans that we've met this evening that are here to, in so many ways, inform us, educate us, enhance us, and encourage us. Mike.
It's been wonderful to listen to all this wonderful sharing. And I just want to remind you that a good time to implement so much of what we discussed here is when we celebrate Earth Day in just a few more days. It wasn't mentioned, but that's the time when we really need to educate our people. I look around here, I think what we need to do is focus much more on the young people, starting in kindergarten, to make these ideas into reality in the near future. I'm not trying to brag, but when I was Bishop of San Angelo for 28 years, every day on Earth Day, I had a service. We'd plant a tree, and we would have the students get up and talk about what we need to do. These were kindergarten up into 8th, 9th grade. So I encourage you, involve the youth. They're the ones that's going to make this happen. Keep working, but involve the youth and get into education and celebrate Earth Day. Talk about it. We just had another important worldwide day that was not mentioned in the local press here, TV or Express News, World Water Day. March 22nd. I looked all over. I don't watch a lot of TV. Not a single word mentioned, our local paper net. But, unless we really get involved, we have to really work on biodiversity. We have to bring human ecology and natural ecology more and more together. And by doing that, we will accomplish a lot of these ideas you mentioned. So that's my comment. I would want to mention that when I come here to meetings like this, last year, the 40th anniversary, I had the privilege, when I was the provincial of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, 100 years ago, no, what's only,
Oh, wow.
1981, 82, I hosted the first conference of this coalition. Many were there. Sister Susan Mika, you were there, and a few others were there. Yeah, oh, she's up here. And a few others, don't you remember? We had Cosby there with us, and that was a turning point to get this involved. We need more sources like that. Thank you.
Amen. Yes, so I would just like to add a few words of thanks and our ending prayer. And yes, I was going to mention Earth Day, and we are trying to do, reinvent ourselves in composting and everything again, because we did that before the pandemic. So, and just to say that in our broader world today, we have so much to give thanks for this evening. I think those mics need to be turned off. Okay. Ruben, the other one, I don't know where it is, but turn it off, please. Yeah. Or else I'll talk on that one. Okay. Anyway, we're in the midst of celebrating Passover, Ramadan, and the Easter season. Spring is upon us now, and Fiesta officially starts tomorrow. And so many of you noticed the Fiesta theme. And of course, on Saturday, Earth Day. So just lifting up all of that. And I know Bishop Pfeiffer's written several treatises on stewardship and Earth Day and water, so definitely if you need his reading, borrow those and we can use those. So in our world here tonight, we give thanks every day for so many of you that are our institutional, associate, and individual members. On the back of the program, the one whole column shows you all of the people that are part of SRIC. And this coalition kind of imitates the national coalition that the Interfaith Center has with the various types of organizations that are part of us. So we continue to be grateful to our staff. Anna, maybe you can stand up. Ruben in the corner. So they're working for us every day. And of course, we're grateful to Sister Elizabeth, our honoree, for her life's work, and the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word who have encouraged her all along the way. We learned so much from the two of you this evening, Virginia, Mario, Father Seamus, yourself too. We're going to try hard to put all of this into practice. I know hopefully each of us takes something away from the talks tonight that we can do. And just to assure both of you, this is a room full of activists. We do pretty much every little thing and every big thing. And we've been involved in stuff for decades with each other, all the groups working together. And just to say too, before we end with the prayer, the wreaths that are on our tables are to be taken home by someone at your table. There's a little card underneath, so the person sitting next to that card could be the person, or you could decide who wants to take it home. Many of you may have seen the Fiesta store that's on East Rector and between San Pedro and McCullough. So they're from there. They're just beautiful. And thank you to Absolutely Delicious, our caterers for tonight, Gabino. I think you've been working with us since around 2003 or 2004. So it's a long-term commitment too. So thank you. So I was going to end, Father Seamus mentioned Laudato Si and our Pope, so I was going to end with a little bit of, from that encyclical. It's a prayer for our earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each being, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. From the words of Pope Francis in Laudato Si. Again, we just want to thank everyone for your presence tonight and be safe in journeying home. We hope to see you again next year. And I thought maybe at the end we could just bless each other that's at our table. So maybe just hold our hands towards the persons at our table. I'll say it first and then we can say it together. God bless everyone. And then of course we're in the season. Amen. Alleluia. So God bless everyone. Amen. Alleluia. Thank y'all so much for coming. So yes, awesome. Yes, you used to be my council person when I lived near the airport.
Oh,
but
yeah?
I don't think that's your district anymore.
Well, we grew over there. We didn't shrink.
Oh, okay.
So if you were before,